let's see. I'm gonna pop this over and do the real proper screen sharing. Hi, hey Young. How you doing? Good, everybody, this is Young. Young is a textiles facilitator. All right, and then, all right, and then make sure the Zoom business is always still slow. Share screen, share that screen. Okay, great. All right.
Corey,
so, sure.
Can students there see the chat, or were you going to be using Slack, or is that just to be determined?
You know, that is to be determined. Largely, I hadn't thought about it yet for this first one. The people who are playing along at home, I can see the chat with them. And so if they have a question, but if Kate, if you can keep an eye on that and then like yell at me if there's something that comes up that I miss, that would be awesome. Because that is totally possible. And so.
And students at home, feel free to unmute yourself as well.
Yes.
I'm happy to do that, but feel free.
Yep, absolutely. So I think I have this, is the screen share up for people playing at home? Cool, all right, great. So what we've got are some slides. One of the things that being a teacher has me doing professionally a lot of the time is preparing slide decks. And so I've got lots of slides for us to talk about lots of weird things. And we're gonna do this within the course. We'll talk this week. We talk about sort of the structure of the course, the process for how it works, questions that you might have, how do you get set up, all of those sort of logistics. And then we're going to get started with our very first round of things to do, which is also a sort of a primer for everything that's going to follow. So with that, we're in Unit 1, Documentation and Inkscape, which is documentation is maybe never the like coolest thing to get started with, but it's definitely something good to get started with early. And so it's a good place for us to start. It's also a good like ramp up into it kind of project. So with that, clicking through these, we've got next up. So I like to, just so that you know, I like to generally do this to have previews of where we're headed. So we're going to talk a little bit about the people of foundations. And so some of those are going to be introductions that you've already seen and done, that we've already done together. Then we'll talk about the weekly plan, sort of how the cycle of the week goes in the course. Then we'll look at sort of the broader items that might still need to be touched up if you're brand new. Several people are brand new MakeHaven members in the class. So we want to make sure that you've got all those things checked off, that you feel ready to go. And then we'll talk about sort of project and planning, how that will work and what our goals are going to be for that over the entire course. And then we'll talk about Inkscape, which is a fun vector design software that we'll be looking at. Although it is not the only one, it's just the one that we're going to try and point you at. Also, all of these slides exist. The link to these is on the class website, and we'll also make sure that everybody is together in the Foundation's Slack channel. Once you're connected to, let's see, let me pop over this, and this is the Foundation, or up here is Slack. So if you haven't officially finished all the process yet, you'll eventually get connected to Slack, which is here. And Slack is going to be our main vehicle for communicating. And so there's this Foundations chat will be how we can just sort of group message each other. You can also directly message me through Slack. This is a system that we'll use. I'm going to refer to this regularly. So I just wanted to put this up. There is an intro link. We'll talk about that at the end. It'll be the like do now thing right after we're done, so that we can answer some questions. But Slack and the hashtag Foundations is what Kate was referring to for our back and forth. So there's totally that. And this is Jezero Crater, where the Mars rover and helicopter are floating around right now, in case you're curious. So for this Foundations, the broad idea for the course, like why are we even doing this, is really an important question. And so really, I want to say this is a course for everybody. And if you were paying attention to everybody's introductions, and I'm sure you were, you probably observed that there are many different people of many different backgrounds in the course. And that's really ultimately what we want this to be. My experience learning all of these things was hodgepodge and from all over the place. And I did a program called Fab Academy that is loosely run out of, was run out of the Center for Bits and Atoms and the Fab Foundation. which are all seated at MIT. And that's a great program. It's really fascinating. It's also very high, fast paced. It's everything that we do in 6 months with like extra code and extra electronics. So, which is really, it's really neat. It's also like unsustainable for many people. And so it was really neat to be able to take this idea and make it fit directly our space so that it works specifically at MakeHaven. So there are things that are immediately actionable, and that it could be for anybody who's interested at any level. So it's just for fun, or intro to Fab in general, or if you wanted to do if Fab Academy sounds immediately interesting to you, this is absolutely the best way to ramp up and make sure that you're successful in that course, because the Fab Academy has like a 40% passing rate. So that's their like big secret, big open secret. And so it's totally, this class we want to make sure is ready for everybody who wants to do it. And I think a big part of that, and this was sort of what I was talking about earlier, is that people need access to these sorts of technologies, these sorts of tools to find ways to express themselves in these formats. And so these are a collection of projects that I have done over the past little while, the class did over the past little while, in order to express yourself and have ideas. This is like a bench that we almost made. Here's a cello made on the CNC machine. There's all sorts of crazy things that you can make to really get your ideas out there if you're interested in pursuing those. But then really, fundamentally, why do we have all these weird sections instead of one class here and one class there? I think that it's best to do it in this large scale format, because you get a lot more by having all of the skills and being able to integrate them. Right now, I'm trying to work on what's very much a traditional woodworking project. I'm trying to build a bar cart, which you'll probably hear me talk about far more than anyone should. But I'm trying to build a bar cart by bending wood, and so using bent wood laminations. And the form that I made to hold those in their shape, I cut on a CNC. So I'm using a CNC machine to make bentwood laminations happen, all of which was designed in 3D CAD. And I printed out some different models to try and make sure that it works. And I'm going to have connections and all those. So if you have these broad skills that cover a lot of different weird areas, they can really come together and help you make neater, more interesting things when you bring them all together as a collective. So the sum really, we think, is greater than the parts on these. And so it's important that you know the people of the class. And first up is JR, who introduced himself and is gone. No, he's over there. And so this is the MakeHaven started in 2012. I just was reminded today. And so he's been doing this for a while, for 10 years as the director. JR makes this all possible. And there's some, I don't understand everything that he does, but he's got some magic in him. Then there's also the other people that you need to know is me. This is the class from last year. The group, we had everybody there. We wish Wakata had stepped just a little bit to the side so we could see his whole face. And then here, I work with high schoolers lots of the time. So here's a band of high school students that I had my last year in Cleveland. In 2017, I did the Fab Academy class. I've been coaching Science Olympiad, which is a fun, weird thing. My actual academic pedigree are 2 education degrees. I've got teaching physics and chemistry, and then another one in differentiated instruction, which if you want to nerd out on that, it's how do you meet people where they are and help them move forward with their learning, which is like the biggest thing that I think is important for this class. We're not here to have grades or compete. I want to help everybody go from where they are forward with what they're interested in. So that's really the goal. Also, even though JR is the director, I am sort of a contractor for MakeHaven. So if you're interested in what my relationship is to this space, I'm not I get paid a little bit for the class, but I am not like an employee. I'm a contractor, in case you're curious what that relationship is. And the same would be true for the facilitators. The facilitator role is, do you want to talk about that?
Facilitators are individuals who volunteer here at the space. We come from a variety of backgrounds. I, in the wood shop, do have a bit of a carpentry background, but I'm a writer by trade. So, and then my position here as a facilitator, there are some perks, but it is not a paid position. In the space, so.
Yeah. And I would say, as one who I'm officially not a facilitator, which is so that I'm not badging all of you all at once every time. It's helpful really to get the experience of the facilitators throughout the space. Facilitators are great. They're able to help with all sorts of things. Paul here is a wizard on the lathe. Ileana is the master of design and printing. She's working on, maybe still working on the risograph, but there's all sorts of crazy printing things that she's able to do. Young, who walked in, makes toys and is fantastic with textiles. And so and she works for, I just lost it, the really nice kids toy, Melissa and Doug, right? So she works as an engineer for them, and then also sort of does her own textile work that goes along with that. So there's all sorts of cool people that you can meet who are facilitators in the space. This is Ashley, who I believe right now is on a plane. She was finishing up a conference for her last job, and now she's on her way back to here. So she's been transitioning in. This is the end of her, I think, first month as a part of the MakeHaven team. But she had a background as a tabletop gaming event coordinator. And so she's got a really cool set of experiences there. And she's going to be the one who's trying to connect together all of the different things. She was in a lot of our meetings, but couldn't be there for all of them. But she's a neat person if you get a chance to talk to her. And then another huge part of the class is all of you. And so we're really excited to have the bunch of you together. One of the things that is a natural part of any class is that we really get excited about bringing people together around learning and doing and making. And it's a really fun, positive experience to have this sort of team of people who are going through and learning these things all along with you. It's a shared experience, which is always sort of a bonding experience to go along with it. There's times where we can all be frustrated at a broken machine together, or where you can say like, this weird guy who talks a lot, what's up with him? There's all sorts of different ways that you can bond and connect. And we hope that this is one thing that's an emergent property of a class rather than a thing that can be directly controlled or put into like a structured piece. But we really hope that you can enjoy each other and working together and be supportive. We really want to make sure that we have an always supportive attitude with each other. We're going to do show and tells with each week's class. So we'll do class first, and then we'll do show and tell after, which I think is maybe even the next slide. And we hope that you can be supportive and encouraging, and all those things can be positive experiences for people all around, keeping in mind that your experience is very different from the people around you. So we hope that that's just a lovely time to work together. And maybe there's a future where there's less masks needed, and we can share a meal together, or have some sort of congeniality, make friends, all that sort of business as the time comes along. We'll get there. It's going to happen at some point. The weekly schedule for the course broadly is right now we're doing this lecture part on Mondays. Then there's a show and tell. There's not a show and tell today because we haven't done anything yet. But we'll work on sort of like what is the target for the week. And so each week we'll talk about what it is that we want to do. Then on Tuesday and Wednesday, you're able to get started, do whatever you want, work on things, not work on things, whatever works for you. I'll message, especially in the early part of the course, I'll be checking in, just making sure that you're all good, okay. And then on Thursday, I'll do office hours. So I come here at about 5 o'clock. The place where I park becomes free at 5 o'clock, and we can talk about secret places for parking once we're done recording this. But the secret places for parking are always good to know. And so after about 5 o'clock, I come in and then I just hang out until if people want to do stuff. There definitely were some times with office hours where nobody came in. It was just me hanging out. There were times where there were lots of people all together. And so we'll be able to make sure that everybody gets the support that they need. And that's a great way to do it. And then Friday and Saturday is sort of more independent work time, whatever works for you. There's no requirement for you to come to office hours, just so that we're clear. But if you wanted to, you totally could. And then Sunday is the same deal. I show up here in the afternoon at about 3:30. Sundays are free parking in New Haven. So if you're interested, if that's important for you, you can totally come down for that. 3 in the afternoon is nice. The sun is up for a lot longer, and so it's reasonably good to go. And Sunday is often where if we were trying to show and tell on Monday, Sunday is kind of the crunch moment. Right. So it's good to be able to get together on Sunday when you're like, I've been working on this and I'm frustrated and I want to make it happen. And then we can get together and connect those dots all on a Sunday. Oh, typically around 3:30. So I come here. Yeah. And so, and for hours and hours is often the amount of time. 3 until I get too hungry or no one's here. That's kind of how it goes. And so what are the things that right now, if you were trying to jot down notes or mental checklists just to feel, sometimes it's good to look at a list and say, I did a lot, or this is what I need to do. If you're still brand new, and we're really excited that many of you are brand new members, you need to make sure that your account gets set up, then your access and badge card. And I think we have just about everybody with a badge ID card, and then connect to Slack. Once you've got a membership, the Slack email comes through. And Kate, if you could make sure that everybody gets connected there, that would be awesome. And then if you want, you can star a few things, like starring the channel foundations means that it stays up towards the top, and that Corey and Ashley, or for me and Ashley, that we can be up towards the top. And so here's mine. And you can see these are all of my like starred people from last year's class. And I'm just going to have a lot of stars is what I cannot bear to unstar someone. So that's exactly where it's going to be. So if you ever see my Slack again, there'll just be lots of names, and that's fine. That's totally what it's for. And then the other things that can be really helpful is to get your first badges. So MakeHaven has this badging system that I think is really clever, where it's a process where you get a little bit of training through a video. There's an online quiz that you take, and then you can come in and get badged and checked out on a tool. And I would say badging, if you were to try and summarize it, Paul, would you say badging is like a make sure I keep all my fingers kind of?
Yes, badging is a process to make sure that we are comfortable enough knowing that you know how to use the equipment safely. And then also it's a great time to get a couple tips because we can't help but sharing our knowledge. So what you would do for the, are you going to go through the process?
No, you go for it.
So the process to get badged on equipment is you identify the area that you want to go, and then you find out what facilitators are in that area. You watch the video, as Corey said, and you take a quiz. The videos range in length, obviously, depending on the complexity of the equipment. The quizzes are all relatively short. And then you contact a facilitator. We have a scheduling form on the website under facilitators where you can go and block off time for the equipment. Most equipment can be done within a session or two. Some pieces do take longer. Some take significantly shorter than like a half hour, but they're half-hour blocks on there. And then if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to that specific facilitator on Slack to make sure that they know that you're going to come on in and then answer any questions.
If I were to try and like guess at the 4 things that I think are the longest badges, it would be the Bridgeport and metal lathe in the metal shop. Those are both, big full day events. Then there is the Gerber CNC in here. And we're thinking about turning that into like a full day of, or not a full day, but like another big class, because that machine is fascinating. I really enjoy it a lot. It's maybe one of my favorites or favorite, but it also is fairly complicated to run, but I think the payoff is great. And then the table saw, I would say, is an hour, maybe.
The table saw is about an hour, yeah.
Yeah, it's the longer of the it's the longer of the woodshop tools, I would say.
Whereas a sander, not going to take you that long to kind of learn how to do that.
Press the button, don't put it on your arm.
Yep.
Right. Like that's the main thing. And so, unless you got really aggressive fingernails, maybe, but don't, that's a bad joke. I shouldn't say that out loud. Okay. And so those are things that if you haven't done that yet, just getting your first badge, you'll start to feel like you're on track, underway. Last year, and you can really rack up a lot. Several of our foundation students from last year are on the badge leaderboard, which is a thing that we have. So if you are goal driven and like to get meaningless check boxes on video games, this is for you. And so I have got a high score of 50 right now, badges. I think the high score is like 65. I'm coming for Bob. And so there's a Bob McGonigal. I think it's Bob McGonigal. Yeah. And so Bob's 65. And so you can absolutely move forward. People in foundations last year are just by like hanging out through the class and doing the things throughout the weeks, you're going to collect several badges, many badges. So you can easily move up on that thing. Ileana, do you know how many badges you have off the top of your head?
No, but I know how many badges I was ending because I watched the video.
Oh,
I got all these different badges that I just got really excited about watching them today. So like you said, I have anybody else for me to do.
right.
And that is something that you recommend. If you watch the video with us, just meet with the facilitator as soon as possible. Get everything you want.
That's true. And so we'll talk about badges a lot throughout the entire course.
I think there's a question.
Oh,
I have a question.
sure, yeah.
Before we get too far into what we're going to do in the future,
Yeah.
what would be a good prompt that you would suggest as a first thing?
Uh,
Knowing what we're going to need to do.
Absolutely. The good first badges to go for, because next week is going to start woodshop.
Corey, can
Oh.
you repeat the question for those of us?
No, you're totally right. What would be a good first badge to get based on sort of where we are and where we're going, if you're interested in getting that started as a process? And I would say the short answer is you don't need a badge for this week's actual like stuff because it's all online. But if you wanted to get started in the wood shop, any of the wood shop badges would be a good place to get going, because they'll, that's sort of the assignment for next week will be get some wood shop badges, and there's a bunch of us, so it could turn into kind of a log jam of bartering for facilitator time. And there are several wood shop facilitators, and we have warned them. We'll warn them again. But if you wanted to start getting wood shop badges this week and then sort of budget out your time a little bit that way, it could work out really well in your favor.
And to add on that, so multiple pieces of equipment, we can badge multiple pieces at a time. So on the sign up sheet, there's columns for 2 individuals, but you can always reach out to the facilitator and see if they're comfortable taking on additional. I'm normally comfortable badging like 4 to 5 people at a time if we're doing the same piece of equipment.
Yep. So, and we'll definitely encourage group badging sessions. Like if we know everybody's going to be in on Thursday, then we'll say like, hey, let's try and get some badges knocked out on Thursday, and just sort of move through as a group. So we can totally work on that. Oh, and Kate is on it. Lila from last year is in 5th place. She's a student in last year's class. She's got 46 badges, in 5th place in the whole space. So you can totally go for it. Lila teaches the tufting class if you've taken that. So cool. Let's see. So let's talk about, before we get too far down this badging rabbit hole, let's talk about projects and sort of where we're going for the course and things this week, because I want to keep an eye on time. We're going to extend a little bit into what will be our show and tell, but we're not going to go the whole 2 hours of me talking. So as we talk about projects, there's many different pieces and things that you've heard said a million times in a million different contexts, but it's just good for us to say it together all in one shot. First off, we really like supply side time management, which is choosing projects for your weeks that are based around the amount of time that you have. So if we're doing woodshop for the next 2 weeks, starting next week and the week after, any sort of woodshop project is up for grabs. We're going to recommend you make like a cutting board, which is a great starter. But if somebody's really gung ho, you could take on building a dining room table. That just feels like too much, though. I'm going to advise you against that. That would be bad supply side time management. Yeah, you got to make those next. That's the next week. And so with that, you want to make sure that you're choosing things that fit the time that you have. So if you've really got an interest in something, we are excited to help support you in learning those things to do all of that. But we also want to make sure that you're choosing things that fit with the time that you've got. So a busy week where it's the end of a project at work, you've got to deliver on something, choose yourself a lighter load for that particular week. We can always sort of connect those dots later on. If you find that you have lots of time, there's definitely weeks throughout the course where I've got winter break or spring break as a teacher. And so in those weeks, I could take on more if I felt like it and was interested. And the same is probably true for you. So it depends on what your situation is. You'll have to play that as we go. But supply side time management is always a good aspirational goal to think about the time you have for planning out the projects that you want to take on. Another word that we're going to say early and often is scope creep. And this is an important one because usually when you take on a project, it just creeps a little bigger and a little bigger, and then eventually it grows out of proportion. Scope creep is something that we're going to try and encourage you to watch out for. It's a scary ghost, a little specter that will follow you around, where you decide like, I've got this project, it's really cool, and I want it to light up, and now I want to add some blinky code, and now I want to add sound, and now I want to add like the now I want to add part of any project can get really troubling really fast. And so really we'll encourage you for the class to try and focus on one part and get a core thing done. And then if that works and you have extra time, you can add on more. But watch out for scope creep. It totally can get you. Another thing that in general, when you're thinking about projects for the class, is to think about series and parallel projects. So sometimes projects have to be done all in a row where one thing leads to the next thing, leads to the next thing, right? If you're building a house, you need to put up the framing, then you can put up the sheathing on the outside, then you can worry about what goes on in the walls, then you can put up drywall, then you can paint. There's like a whole process that you go through. But it's a lot better if you can do parallel projects where, especially for like 3D printing, you can design one thing and then you can start a print, and then you can work on more designs for other things. And the printer could be running while you're doing more other design work. So you can, if you're smart about it, some weeks this can be really efficient and really effective. And other weeks it can really be vexing that you're sort of stuck in that linear trail. But if you can find a way to work in a parallel fashion, it can be really helpful. So if you've got X, Y, and Z that need to happen, if you can start X and you don't have to wait to start Y until you get done with the first one, it can be a great strategy. Another thing that we really like for projects is to encourage you to always do bottom up and from like simple beginnings and then go on. So Legos are the example. Legos in the 1960s were largely mainly colored bricks. And there's some really awesome ads. If you want to look back at marketing from Legos in the 60s, it's really good. But the 1960s version of Legos was relatively simple. In the 80s, you had these sort of simple shapes of community spaces, of large equipment, things like that. There was a lot of simple colors. And then you get to the 2000s where you've got the crazy Harry Potter thing, right? Lego learned the basics and they built up from there. And so thinking about that with your projects can be really helpful. Focus on the essentials, the basics. And then once you've got those things nailed, then you can move on to the more complicated stuff. And there'll be weeks where, I mean, some of you are already professional developers, and building a website is going to be something where you can jump in at the Harry Potter castle level. And others, you may be hopping in and like, I just want to get the bricks to connect, right? And so that's going to be different for each person. You'll have to think about where you are and how you move that forward. But it's really important to think about the way that you want to progress. It's the most difficult when you say, I would really like the Harry Potter castle, but you've never played with Legos. Right. So think about sort of where you are and where you're going and the direction that you want to pursue things. Another thing, and this is very common in developer world, is to think about how you build your project. If it's built out of modular pieces that you can work on and test separately and then bring together, that modularity is really helpful. If you've got separate files that you can connect, or if you've got different design pieces that you can bring together, then you can work on each one of those separately. Whereas sometimes you have monolithic projects where it all sort of comes together in one moment. If you're trying to build a bike frame, for example, and you want to build a bike frame, and the only way that you can know if your bike frame works is when it's all the way done and you get to sit on it for the first time, that's kind of a big monolithic project where you're stuck not really knowing if it's going to be the right shape and if it's going to work until the very end. If you can test different things, like test the strength of the bike frame or find ways to do it in modular pieces, it can often be helpful and less frustrating if you can support and test little pieces. Another big piece of advice is to document as you go. We're going to talk about documenting is about to be our next slide. This is the main idea that we're building up to for right now. Documenting is a big deal for the entire course. It's something that is effortful. It takes practice to get good at it. Just to even remember to do it definitely is a focused effort. And it's, I would say, for the medium level documentation that I can get done, it still takes effort and time and thought. So don't underplay it, but document as you go. I think that a set of photos as you're doing a project is always really helpful. I really like screen captures on Windows. There's the snipping tool, which I'm pulling up right now, just to show you what it is. The snipping tool is, come on, cursor. This little thing. So if you have a Windows computer, you can use a snipping tool like this. You can do screen grabs. There's all sorts of different ways to make that happen, but to get content off of your computer, you can grab it that way. There's also just writing. Some people are fantastic writers. Some people like find it cathartic. And so if that's you, maybe writing as you go, or as opposed to trying to remember every detail after you're done. So there's no specific requirement that we're going to have for documentation for the course. We just want you to be thinking about it as you're progressing through so that you can document as you go. There's a lot of time, there's many projects that I have built where I wish I could see the middle step again. Right? There's often the design I have somewhere. There's the finished project I might have in a closet or a picture of it. But the middle step is usually the one that I forget to take pictures of. And so remembering to do that as you're moving through can be really helpful, especially if you want to go back and see what was working then that isn't now. Let's see. Oh, and Kate said that Ada is our number 8 badge person on the list. Another student from last year is the number 8 badge winner. So if you like to check off those awards, there you go. You can do it. We're going to recommend for documenting that you try Google Sites. This is not a required. This is not saying that you have to use Google Sites. Google Sites is how I built the Foundations website, and it is very quick and moderately easy. So let me pull up my cursor across 2 screens. So in here, here's my browser, and we go to the Foundations website. This is all built in Google Sites. So you can get a nice web page or website that comes together relatively easily. You don't need to write a ton of code. All of the interface can be designed in here. So if you wanted to, you can click through and sort of see what these units are. This is content that I wrote, often in something with better spell check, and then paste it into here. You can put in videos, you can put in photos, you can link in whole other web pages. There's all sorts of ways that you can make stuff work. And so Google Sites has the ability to do all of this without needing any code. So this is what we're going to recommend for everybody to try something this week. We want you to take a look at this just to start to build a platform for yourself to do documentation. If you're 100% dead set on not that, you absolutely can. So if you're already a pro at WordPress, you've got some other system that works, you want to use Git pages to make something nice and easy, or if you want to build your own full stack web app, go for it. We're not telling you that you have to do Google Sites. We just want to encourage it as something that works. The interface for it is relatively straightforward. There's some quirkiness, don't get me wrong, but there's, with the weird year we had as a teacher going through the past school year, there are about 1 million videos out there on how to use Google Sites for a classroom. And so even though that may not be your goal, there's tons of guides out there on how to do exactly this so that you can spin up a website pretty quickly. I wrote up a guide that's right here on how you could structure this, and this is going to be linked. I'll put this in the Foundations chat after class so that you can get directed to this, but this sort of gives a structure for how you might want to put these things together. It's loading pages, which takes some time, but it'll give you some pointers on how to get that up and running if you're interested in using Google Sites. Let's see. Well, I lost it's in one of these. Now I got too many tabs. Back to this. Click. Okay. So once we're in here, Google Sites is a great place to get started. It's nice and straightforward. There's tons of other options. If you want to learn HTML and CSS, this is maybe not the one to go after. If you're really into that, you totally can learn those skills. I can help you spin up a website through GitHub where you're just writing a little bit of code. If you love Figma and you want to use that to sort of work in a design for web pages, you can go after that also. There's tons of options, and we really want to encourage you to do any of them that you're interested in. And if you want to try 5 or 6 different methods, we can 100% guide you there. I'm just going to say Google Sites though for now, so this one everybody tries because it's the simplest one, so that we're clear. Because one of the things that's tricky is while we go through the course. There's 40 weeks of this. We got to plan for the long haul, right? And if documenting it takes extra effort to document, you could double your work every week in the amount of effort it takes to document. So having it be nice and easy, even though you may want to learn deeper secrets of the web in the future, it may not be the way to do your documentation. What's up?
I think I stumbled upon some examples that some of the last year students did, but then I lost it. Where is that?
We linked that from the people part of this page, and we want to update the people list of the class. But we can definitely link you to some of those. And Kate has a shining example of what we hope documenting can be. Ileana had some really beautiful things at the start. She's waving no at me. So I we won't do that. There's tons of different ways. I would say we'll direct you to Kate. So we'll send out a couple links of examples that are really nice. There's also, if you want to see what Fab Academy looks like, I mean, you can totally do this. You can just Google, you could Google me, Corey Rice Fab Academy. And so in here, here's my Fab Academy website, where you can see sort of what it looked like from my documentation when I was in a class like this, when I took Fab Academy. So you can, and this was still fairly early on in my experience, where you can look through the weekly projects that I had there. You can see my final project, which is like this automated pill dispenser thing that like would, pour in a bottle of pills and it will dish them out as a person needs them and make a sound. It kind of it mostly worked. I wouldn't trust it very long, but it would deliver a pill, right? It would do what it needed to. But I would want to spend more energy testing. In that course, this had to be built in 2 weeks. So like it went from idea to thing in 2 weeks. And that's why it needs more effort if I'm gonna trust it to keep grandma safe and healthy. I wanted it to hold, like, I think that's 1 bottle of vitamin D pills that I would pour in the top. Yeah, yes, it would distribute pills for a lot longer than the 2 weeks, for sure. It was just that I had 2 weeks to go. Like, I had made some progress on this project prior to the last 2 weeks of that class, but basically it boiled down in my particular situation that I had 2 weeks to go from idea to thing. And so I would want to spend more time making sure that it worked, that all the bugs were worked out, and all of that was all buttoned up. But this is documenting as it goes. There's some info about here. That's Carolyn, my now wife, then girlfriend. It says my favorite karaoke song is Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire. I think I want to amend that now. I would say that it's Country Roads, Take Me Home by John Denver, which is also a good one. So you can document like this. There's lots of ways to do that, but that is written with, if we head over to About Me and hit Control U, which is always fun to do on websites. This is code that was written by hand, and that some people are really good at it. I think at this point it would be toss up similar speeds for me between Google Sites and this. But if this is a whole new skill, I wouldn't advise this being your first go around. So instead, you can use Google Sites, and then you get this fun little editor that you click on, and you can add content with some spell check and some formatting that just comes in for free. So this is the actual interface where you can help it. It'll help you with layouts and groups and dividers and all those sorts of things, and it works really nicely. But heading back over to slides. So one of the things about building a website, especially if you're going to think about how to do this and how to do it well, is how do you deal with images on the web, which is, a website is really exciting, but it's also got lots of information that goes back and forth. The text code is not the heavyweight lifting of a website. It's always the images. And so there's many ways to have pictures show up on the internet. And the big ones that we're gonna try and consider is the juxtaposition of vector files and raster files. And we'll talk about this a lot throughout the entire course. So we wanna bring it up early so we can circle back to it. In a picture, in this little square, that's just the white rectangle with a red square, or the white square with a red square inside. Here's 2 ways to represent the same thing. It's 16 by 16 pixels with the 10 by 10 red inside. On the right, that is a bitmap image. So if you look really closely and squint your eyes, those are hexadecimal codes for the color of each pixel in that thing. So 16 by 16, you can do the math and figure out how many pixels worth of coded information is inside there. That is the way that photos from a camera are stored by pixel information. It's raster where each piece is stored, but you could draw the exact same thing. And here it is zoom 500% with 3 lines of vector code. And so it's really an interesting thing where if you want to try and minimize the amount of information that you have to pass through the web to get from your server to your user, you often will want to try and do graphics that are vector based because it can save you a lot of memory. It also, for us and for our benefit, there's lots of tools in this space that will be able to cut directly along vector toolpaths. So it's interesting for us to start to explore this right now because we're going to see it as a recurring theme throughout the entire course, is how do you turn your ideas into vectors that we can play around with? So commonly those are SVG, DXF, AI if you have Adobe Illustrator. PDF is actually one of my favorite transfer formats to get from software to software. And then you can do some XML, and then maybe you can count HTML if you include the vectors, the SVGs inside it. And then these are all of the ones that you might get out of a camera. Bitmap, JPEG, a RAW file if you've got a fancy camera that will do, I think the iPhone will do that now with RAW files. I carry an Android phone, so I don't know. HEIC is the standard iPhone format, but there's some subtlety to this that can get tricky. But we're gonna encourage you over the course of the week to think about this. If you're building your own website, you're 100% gonna need to think about photo image compression. So if you're building it from scratch, this is totally something you're gonna need to think about because here's the loading times for the MakeHaven page. And you can look through here. Some of the longer ones are JavaScript, and then there's also some that are images. So some of the big heavyweight content that comes through on a web page that slows down its delivery are the photos that come with it or the videos that it may want to load. But if you compress your photos, their image size gets smaller and it's easier for them to work through. And the good news is if you use Google Site, you don't have to worry about this one iota. It does all of that for you. So one more reason why we're recommending Google Sites. This is a really neat piece of the web where you can optimize your photos so they go from maybe an original image like this to something that's compressed and half as much information to push through the web. But if you use Google Sites, you don't have to worry about this at all. It just does it for you. But it's a really fascinating thing. You can attend entire webinars that are recorded online just to see how this works and how you make it work. But these are the most common suite that we could brainstorm last year of vector design softwares that we would commonly recommend. Adobe Illustrator is fantastic. It is by far the industry standard of software packages. However, it is wicked expensive. So unless you have that package for work, you may not want to invest the cash that it takes to have that. There's also Sketch. Oddly, I'm a Corel Draw native. That's the one that I learned on many years ago. And for whatever reason, it's the one that my brain still jumps to frequently. Gravit and Affinity, I think, are available online. Sketch, Gravit, and Affinity I've opened and then closed again. And so you may find that those are really great. My experience with them is limited. But Inkscape is what we really encourage here at MakeHaven. Inkscape is free to download and install. It works on all major operating systems. So that works whether you're a Mac, PC, or a Linux friend. And so you can do all of those things there. There's tons of really cool video lessons. Logos by Nick is a channel that I just really enjoy. He's got a good underbeat with music to his speech. He guides you through how to do these things and is a professional graphic designer that works with these tools. He has tutorials, I think, in Illustrator and in Inkscape, but the Inkscape ones are really great. And I would say that Illustrator has, teams and teams and teams of people that work on it. It generates tons of cash for Adobe. And so they've got lots of people making sure that it's got the very best underworkings. Whereas Inkscape has got its quirks. She's a moody friend, but a good one. How would Ileana, you're looking at Inkscape like you've got a story to tell. Saying that if you, I'm just repeating the microphone, you can design in Illustrator and then switch it to Inkscape. Yeah. Yeah, PDF is my favorite transfer file. Just to recount for the recording, if you work in Illustrator, it's not a super big push to Inkscape. You'll be frustrated, I think, for a little bit, but the sooner you get in, the less you think of it as like the free alternative, which it is. If you don't walk into it thinking that it's the less good version. It's the free version with different icons, and that's going to frustrate you for a while. Because if you're a designer who's used to nice graphic interfaces that you're used to, it's got a different one. You can configure it, which is really neat. Mine, I made into dark mode. And so I'm going to pull mine up. Mine may look different than yours, but all the buttons are the same. You can configure it. It's one of the neat things about Inkscape is that you can play around with it more than you can some of the other softwares. And we use it directly to run our laser machines, to run our laser cutter, to run the vinyl cutter, and some other stuff. What's up? There's definitely vector apps that are good for the iPad, but I don't have one, so I'm not the first one to jump after that. Ileana, do you know any jump into mind for you for an iPad app that's? Ada, who was a student in our class last year, had a good app that she liked. We'll ask her. I know that she had one. I don't know what it was. So we'll be able to find that and get you that within a day or two so that you can have one to go after. Probably also, if you search the App Store, you can find one that might work. You can also find a lot of duds, I'm sure. So we'll try and find you a good one so you don't spend your time searching, but it should be able, you should be able to have a design and then transfer it, and PDF and SVG are good transfer formats. But if you're wondering why we're saying this instead of Photoshop or instead of GIMP or other softwares, it's because these images are not photos. That little egg that's there, if you just hold on for a second, it's got geometry that's describing its shapes and colors. It is not a picture of an egg. And so being able to describe directly the shapes that are involved lets you have much less information that you're moving around. And for the case of the laser cutter, if I want to cut that out, I need a file that describes where the edges of the egg are, or where the circles are that I want it to cut for the polka dots. All of that needs to be described by vectors, and that's a big part of this vector design software. And so it's, even though they look like pictures, you got to start to step back from that. And we'll revisit this many times. If you're looking around just trying to find vectors for inspiration, trying to see what they look like, many of these are great examples. They often have crisp, clear lines. There's usually not as many colors in them. The Obama Hope poster was one of the things that really popularized vector images as a category, at least in my mind, where you could take a photograph of a person and break them into just a few crisp, clean colors and really cleanly express a face. There's other examples here where you can have the border of France. You can have these interesting logos, the world, Bart Simpson, Superman logo. Lots of logos are made in vector designs for a bunch of reasons, but they're simple to transfer and they scale really well. So vectors are really helpful for all of that. And a good example of vectors being scalable is this. My wife is a creature of many habits, but one of them is improv comedy. And so she was part of this improv comedy festival, and we made the sign for the festival, which was a vector design that you could scale. It looked in the top right, that's it in a text message. And then that poster is, I think, 7 feet wide by 4 feet tall. And it looks the same at all scales. So vector designs do a really nice job of scaling. Whereas if you took a photo and tried to scale it up like that, you'd really run into images where the pixels turn into large squares across your photo. So it's an interesting piece to take into account. And while you're building a website, that's important because you never know what size screen the person has, right? If they're looking at something on a phone, it's a lot of information jammed in for a tiny screen. Or if they've got a huge ultra wide monitor, they may be looking at your photos in a giant format. So vectors are really helpful because they give us that ability to scale. And if you master this, you can have an income just making vector logos. I mean, in theory, there's an ability to get $10,000 for a logo, but that feels like it's the golden egg. Fiverr has really undercut that market. So if you know what that is, I'm sorry. But it does exist. There's a possibility where you could become a logo designer. Within vectors, you want to start to think about shapes as positive and negative space, which might be a throwback to old high school art class or your common everyday experience. So we want to encourage you to think about those sorts of things as you're looking at Inkscape and playing around in it. And mostly this week, all we want you to do is play in Inkscape, just to sort of get used to it, try and come up with a design that you like. A good way to get started is to do a sketch. That really leads us into what our next steps are, where you'll think about shapes being added together, shapes being subtracted, doing intersections, overlaps. Those sorts of ways to get shapes to pop into existence can be really, really helpful if you start to imagine that happening. And then you'll get to SVG paths and node edit, and mostly we'll be playing around with this. I'm going to be sending over the course of the week in the foundations chat videos that sort of guide you through what this looks like in Inkscape. So if you wanted to play around and do some of this, you can watch some videos that really do a good job at guiding you through. Like this one is actually a link to a video on the 21 main tools in Inkscape. So what do we want you to try and do today or this week? We would like you to really have 2 goals for the week. The first goal for the week, the thing that we'd like you to do first, is to think about how you want to do your documentation. And so to spin up a Google site that is just the core of a site. It doesn't need to be a lot. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, but some sort of a website or web page where you can describe what you're up to. That's one of the main goals that we have for you this week. It should probably be on Google Sites, but you're welcome to try anything else. If you want guidance or support on choosing other platforms, we sure can. But Google Sites is a good place to start. You can decide how public or private you want that to be. You can build websites behind passwords. You can also have them public and out there for the whole web and pay for advertisement if you want. I wouldn't advise that, but you totally can. Then for right now, it's just going to be a couple of pages, like an about me, maybe your favorite karaoke song, your favorite sweet treat, any of those sorts of things you could put on there if you wanted. And just like a little documentation about your process of putting together a website can be what the first little bit is. Don't forget screen grabs, captures like that, pictures. If you want to upload some pictures of yourself, your dog, your family, that can be fun. You also don't have to do any of that, but you can make your web page sort of your own. Then the other thing that we want you to do, because we're going to revisit Inkscape so many times throughout the course, is we want you to try and make a maker's mark, a little logo for yourself. And this is one for me. It's a C in a weird curvy triangle. I'm not a graphic designer. Let me be very, very clear. This was my first attempt at making a fave icon, which is, and actually I might still have it up. Yeah, up here, you can see this logo showed up in the top of the web page up here in this browser space. I surfed once, it was painful. There's also, this showed up in, if you go to weekly projects, I think this was in computer aided design. So you can design all sorts of things. We'll get to 3D modeling eventually. But here I tried a few different logos, right? There's many different ways. The middle one is not a vector. And so you can play around with what you want it to be. But ultimately, if you're going to use this in multiple places, if you want to have a design that you're like, I need to cut something on the laser just to prove the idea, having a vector file like this, that's your mark, can be really helpful. Just as a like, I have this file, I know it'll work, let me cut it, it's nice and easy. So having one of those just as a way to sort of add a quick brand to something can be really helpful. You can, if you're building your Google Sites, and let me head back over to the published site here, or actually in the settings. In settings for Google Sites, you can add in brand images. So you can add in your logo as like your brand image. It will pop up as your image in a few different places. You can decide your colors. Here's your fave icon, which is the thing that shows up in the top. You can start to think about it just a little bit in sort of a passing way, what your branding might be, or if you're 100% in for it and you know what you want it to be, you can decide what your branding on your website would be for documentation and really go after it. And so in a modern world, this kind of communication is really fun to explore. And it's something that's also a lot harder than it sounds like. Because this is largely going to be design work that you're thinking about over the course of the week, I want to warn you about scope creep again, because design work is something that with, and not as a, there's 3 professional designers in the room. So as not a professional designer, I want to say that for me, there's no objective endpoint. We're like, this design is perfect and done. I would just like continue to fiddle with it for forever until I don't know when it would be over. And so I want to warn you against that. Sometimes you need to set a timer and say like, I'm going to come up with a design, and in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to have 5 designs that I've sketched on paper. And then I'm going to spend another hour or 2 actually like turning them into vectors. So having a structured plan for yourself can be really helpful if you're thinking about these sorts of ideas, especially for the Inkscape part. Whereas making the website might be a little bit more like assembling pieces and parts. So that may feel more like building things one brick at a time, whereas the design work in Inkscape is going to feel much more like an art project. So it's 2 interesting things to go after. We don't want these to grow out of proportion. So please take a look at these with a degree of precision. Think about your time, and I would really recommend, and I won't say this is necessarily always helpful, but set a timer, start a timer, and think about how much time you have and how much time you want to contribute to something like this. Because if we're doing this right, we'll be coming back and touching up our documentation all the time. So you can come back and change things at any point in the future. And Google Sites is really good about making that sustainable, because you've got one spot where you can change your brand image, you can change your main colors and all that sort of stuff. But that is our big idea for the week, is to go through and think about documentation in Inkscape. There's lots of logistics. Oh, here's my Inkscape finally opened. One of the things about Inkscape is that it can be slow to start. This is what Inkscape looks like on my computer. So if I wanted to go through and do that same triangle design, you could use things like this is, here's a triangle, and then I can do just a little bit of rounding on it so that it turns into that shape. Here's this red one. And then there's a bunch of different tools that you might play around with, where you can say, I would like a path and a linked offset. And once you do this, you can start to have really interesting pieces that pop into existence and have all sorts of looks relatively quickly. So with Inkscape, you can start to think about shapes, how they fit, how they connect. It's a neat way to start to explore things that will pay off, because we'll be using this again and again and again. But I feel like if I continue talking, I'm just going to start repeating myself even more. And I've learned that's bad after teaching for so long. Thanks, Young. I can feel that that look.
I'm here to support.
I appreciate it very much. And so with that, the next step in our evolution of the class would be to go back around. I'm going to switch the camera around. We're going to do the other thing. We don't have a show and tell, but what's fun to sort of get in that progression is to jump in and see if you have any ideas, and to hear from each other just a little bit is really neat, to see if you're like, absolutely Google Sites is for me, or I want to make a website with a node server and to have a MongoDB as a database and all of the different crazy things that you might want to use to build a website. It's fun to hear from each other. What are your first thoughts about what you want to make? And so normally we do that after show and tell, but without a show and tell, just kind of fun to go around and see what people's thoughts are. So with that, we've got Robin and Seenam. Your microphones are somewhat attached to where you are. Would either of you be willing to start us off, just to say what your thoughts are about websites and those sorts of things while I do some logistics?
Sure.
Sure.
I was gonna say, I was interested in the Google Sites. I have to say I am new to programming. So yes, I would start with that.
Cool. And have you ever, how about your experience with Inkscape? Are you new to Inkscape, or do you are Illustrator experience, any of those things?
I have brief experience with Adobe Illustrator. So I used it a couple of times. So but yeah, that's it.
Cool. Yeah, that's neat. Also, it looks like my microphone is working great. And Seenam, how about you? Any thoughts on platforms? Do you have an instant gut reaction?
Yeah, it terrifies me. Terrified of web space. I tried to once create a website for my portfolio. Ended up getting a lot of help because it was just terrifying, but I'll figure it out as I go. And any type of creative drawing also, I'm really scared, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, you'll do great. A good piece of advice is start off with drawing on paper first. Like do it there so that you don't have any of the weird software issues to deal with. And then once you've got something that you half like, then try it in software is always a good strategy. So cool. Good luck. Thank you both for being the first ones to give it a shot. I'm going to pass around the microphone so we can hear if anybody's got any first thoughts. You don't have to have a well-developed thought, just whatever you're thinking, like, cool, this is what I want to try, or I have tons of experience with something. If you've got some counter examples, that's also lots of fun. So here we go.
Well, I have never tried anything of this, so this is super new. I'm just gonna try to have fun, not to put a lot of pressure on me, and we will see what's gonna happen.
So I actually kind of started my documentation before I was accepted into the cohort. So I did that on Notion. So I'm probably going to use Notion. But yeah, so Notion is a kind of like Google Sites a little bit, maybe stripped down a bit. But I've used it a lot. So
I can pull it up in a second. We're trying to sell it as if you were to, or let me pull up the. You're good. What's your experience with vector software?
Well, I'm a graphic designer, so I'm pretty experienced in Illustrator. I've never used Inkscape though, so that'll be interesting.
Cool. And so I'm gonna just talk with teacher voice so that maybe that microphone can hear me. It's a thing. If you wanted to stick with Illustrator, you completely can. We're not saying you're required, but you'll need to know how to move gracefully from Illustrator through Inkscape to like run the laser. So understanding it to some extent is going to be important, but if you've got mad design chops, you can stick with whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
And then I've got up on screen Notion. So can you chat just a little bit about what Notion is?
Yeah. So when I signed up, this was completely free. I'm noticing there's a button that says like try free. I think there's like a paid version for personal use if you want to like upload a ton of high-res photos. But I haven't had to pay for it yet. So I don't know, take that with a grain of salt. But Notion has a lot of like databases. It's basically like you kind of click on a blank page and you're like, do I want a column? Do I want 3 columns? Do I want to put a picture here? Do I want a toggle list here? Do I want an icon or a title? So I would just say it's like a super intuitive, easy way to like use building blocks to make pages. And then there's some cool like database capabilities for like sorting and tagging things. That I think makes it like really fun and flexible. It's just there's almost so much flexibility. It can be a little bit overwhelming at first, but they also have some templates that help you get a little bit inspired and see what it can do. So I really like it, but I also have a lot of experience with it. It's easy to get kind of running down the rabbit hole.
It does look like there's tons of tutorials and there is a free personal tier.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Awesome.
Yeah, so super new to me too. But so the only thing I did maybe a little bit was maybe like logo design. So I used some web-based services, and I can't even remember, but I used Canva. And there's also Affinity Designer that you can use on your iPad and all that. But I did like super simple logo design.
So I'm comfortable with vector programs. I did look at Inkscape and it's pretty understandable. So I might just fool around in there instead of using, we'll see. I also looked at Google Sites, and that's probably what I'll use, so I don't get hung up in trying to figure out how to, build a site.
It's totally, I think Google Sites, I mean, I built the class website on it. I think
Yeah.
it's a noble way to go after building a website.
But I have two questions, though.
Sure, yeah.
I read that, you could build a site or you could make a blog. Is that true instead?
Sure, yeah. Any
So-
format that works for you. Is
So
totally
how
fine.
would you do a blog based on these kinds of tools?
Actually, Kate hopped out, but Kate wrote a blog. And basically that was how she did her experience. With blogs, you can write text and often add pictures. I think she used WordPress, which has some really nice formats for that. It's been a long time since I've written anything like a blog. So I'm sure it's gotten nicer. But it's totally a doable thing where you can write up content and add pictures.
Yeah, it just kind of sounds like at the beginning, there's going to be more words than images, and then all of a sudden it'll get to images and less words. So I really don't know.
Right. And either of those formats are going to be good for Google Sites drag and drop. So you can pop in text blocks and photos wherever you like.
Yeah.
And I find that interface really helpful. Some people really love the blog format where they can.
It's more linear.
It is. It's totally more linear. So it depends on your mode. In both cases, you can make it work. The neat thing about blogs is that they almost always are more easily integratable with code. So if you wanted to, you're starting off with just writing lots of text, and then you want to be more in charge with the style, format, how it looks. It's often with a blog a lot easier to make those changes. All sweeping effect later on.
Yeah, and then the other question was storage of our images before we then use them. I mean, at the moment, since I'm Mac based, everything is in pictures or in iCloud. But I'm happy to put them elsewhere if it's going to be super easy, say to make a Google Images collection. I don't know, but I don't do that now.
Right. And that's something that I was going to talk about in the show and tell next week. But I use Google across the board. And so I have a Google Photos account, all my pictures go into there. And then I have like a photo album that I just keep with all my weird maker stuff all in one spot. And so it's relatively easy to manage it all in that one ecosystem as part of the reason why it's helpful for me to do Google Sites. And that might be equally true if you go the Google Sites route and you have a Google Photos account. It can be easy to just get those things to all work in the same spot.
Yeah, and it also seemed like there was a suggestion you might even want to create a Google account just for this class.
It totally could be helpful. Last year, the people who were in it all had Google accounts at the start, or very quickly got them, and so then we could have a shared photo album of like photos you submit if we wanted to have like marketing things, or if we wanted to do whatever, or just to like celebrate cool stuff that we made. It is by no means, we're not making anyone submit photos like that, but I find it helpful, and I think that we're going to have 13 different experiences, 13 different solutions to that problem. But it's the one that I do. So that's
my Google Drive is a real mess right now, so I'm not so sure I want to like.
Google Drive and Photos are separate. So
I know.
They don't have to intermingle, which is really serious.
Good. Okay.
I'm probably going to use Google Sites because I don't know anything about that, and it seems pretty intuitive. I also have no knowledge of Inkscape or vector graphics whatsoever, so I'm going to learn that too.
That's good.
That's it.
I think I'm going to use WordPress instead of Google Sites. I have some very limited experience with WordPress, but just on the level of publish posts. So now I'm going to build a website from all scratch myself. About the logo design, I actually have a question. So So these CNC machines here are not compatible with AI?
The machines won't directly run an AI file.
Oh, okay.
But they will, it's different for different machines. The one we have the best chance of that is the vinyl cutter, because that's got a crazy software that we'll get into in a few weeks. The laser will run out of a SVG file in Inkscape.
Okay.
And so that's why we really recommend Inkscape as the software. And then once you put in the effort to learn one of them, it's helpful enough.
Yeah, but can we save files on AI in the format of SVG? Can we do that?
Yes, in Adobe Illustrator, you can export as.
We can export a lot of file formats, right?
Yes, you sure can.
Okay.
The tricky thing, and this is Ileana can speak to it more, the SVG files that you export from Illustrator and then import into Inkscape, they're not always complete, perfect one-to-ones.
Oh.
Skip a step and just like create SVG files and Illustrator with Inkscape. It doesn't, there are some points that are flows, there are some things that are identified as objects. They're not necessarily the same kind of SVG file, even though you could think they were.
That would be annoying, dude. So did you take time to recreate the whole thing in Inkscape? Okay. Okay. I see.
Yeah. So choosing the right software is tricky, and that's changed about SVG because SVG is an evolving file standard. It's something that has had to be tricky. That's why our first recommendation is not going to Inkscape on that one. You're just going to learn more.
Yeah. Also, the interface of I downloaded Inkscape just now. I think the interface looks easier. AI is more complicated. It has too many buttons.
It's got lots of buttons.
Yeah.
I have no experience with vector images or with website building, so I'm excited about the recommendation of Inkscape and with Google Sites. The only thing I do have experience with is documentation because I worked in a lab for so many years. So I'm excited about getting back into that. The thing that I am nervous about is I'm used to physical lab notebook documentation. So transferring that from a physical notebook to a digital documentation style will be interesting to see.
Sure. And so to be very clear, we don't have like at the end, we're going to give people, when we all make it through all together as one big happy team, we're going to give you a certificate, and there's no strict documentation required. So if you're a person who wants to take five-hand notes the whole time, and then have other ways to publicize your printed work, your like photos or whatever, totally fine. We're just trying to encourage and support in this direction. In the more that you get good at web things, the more it enables you. There's all sorts of cool tools that you can start to apply once you're better and better at navigating and manipulating the web.
I almost want it to be two-step, like physical is what went wrong and what I figured out while it was happening, and then the web will be like, here's how to not do what I messed up.
Hi, I'll probably stick with the Google Sites. I don't have much experience in building websites except like drag and drop sites like Squarespace, and for my business I use like Shopify, things like that. Documenting, I feel like I document pretty well now. Like I usually tape myself when I make things, so like time-lapse videos or whatever the thing is. So that should be fine. Vector tools, Inkscape is new for me. I was using Illustrator before. I used to go to the library all the time downtown. They have a laser printer there. So I was using Illustrator to make the different things. So I have some skills, but not like a deep knowledge in it. But like making like logos and things, I've never done that in like Illustrator or Inkscape. I've typically just use Procreate and draw in there. So I'm interested in trying to figure out like how to use both programs and like transfer like paint things I'm doing in my Procreate app to like a vector app, or like, I know people do that and I just don't have the skills yet. So yeah, so some like beginning level skills.
Yeah, it's neat. You definitely learn as you go. So there's all sorts of cool things about it. All right, Vincent.
I'm pretty new to vector images, so I'll probably stick with Inkscape. I also prefer free software anyway. For the documentation site, the structure should probably be fairly uniform, fairly blog-like anyway, is what I'm envisioning. I'll probably stick with GitHub Pages and ViewPress. So I'll be writing some of it, but not all of it.
That makes total sense. And you would know that the GitHub files, repository limit is gig. So you want to stay under that limit. So you're going to need to host your images.
Yes.
Right. And did you say, missed it, where you're going to host those? Did you say that, or
It was going to be GitHub Pages. Oh, for the images.
for the images, yeah.
That's a good question. I was going to assume Google Photos, but I'll have to see if Google Photos will let you just hot link photos like that.
It will. I'll send you a link. There's a secret sneaky way to make it happen with Google Photos.
Okay, great.
Yes, it's really nice. But Flickr also works well. Yeah.
When you say post the images, you mean just where you're gonna upload them outside of like your phone or device?
Yeah, Vincent, it looks like you want to explain, or I can absolutely answer the question.
Yeah, I mean, what I assume you're asking is literally where you'd put the pictures. That would be, say, like Flickr, Google Photos, and then from there, it would, if you're making the page yourself, you'd then go to that place, whatever way they want you to pull the photos back out. That's where you'd also take the photos back out and put them on your page. But maybe he can have a better explanation.
Just like a web-based place to save it.
A place to save it, right? Because if you're trying to build, you run into file limit sizes really quickly. Your images, everybody's got that folder on their computer that's giant in the chat or nephew or whatever. And so when you have those photos, it's hard to, a website often isn't the place where you want to store the web page content information, like the words, is not the same place you want to have all the pictures. And in the case of GitHub, you can only put 1 gig in the words content part of the web page for file information. So you have to store the photos that can quickly turn into much more than that somewhere else, and then pull them in. Is it interesting? It's one of the many secrets that you learn about how the web works. The deeper you get into that one, we can go real deep if you want, but maybe it's not the thing for the first week. Is what I want. All right, I'm gonna grab the mic. Thank you for the chat about hosting photos, and I think we went through the slides. We had a lovely introduction, and we have sort of plans for the week. And so I'm really excited to be able to help everybody. And on Thursday and Sunday, I'll be back in here if you want help. Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to?
I don't know.
Oh, you can interrupt my flow anytime. I was just going to say, I'll be back around and able to help.
Yeah. So just some things that I think might be helpful to think about when going about this, because I see a lot of new members coming into the space. That when it comes to doing craftsmanship projects, I mean, these are more intellectual projects, but we're going to be moving into a very physical space pretty soon. And I think when it comes to that, knowledge is really deceiving, because you can learn mentally how to do a skill, but you need to teach your body how to also do that skill. So that kind of takes me into my second thing, which is be kind to yourself. Be kind with your expectations of what it is you're going to create. There's a lot of DIY channels now on every platform you can imagine, and it makes it look so simple to get a palette and build a couch. And it is doable. All of these things are doable. You can accomplish it, but don't benchmark off of something you've seen online. Benchmark your success off of what you started with. And then from there, this class will take you and build out a ton of incredibly great skills and hopefully some really cool projects.
That was magical. And really solid advice, Paul. Now we're just sort of chatting about things, but that's the biggest piece across the entire course. I've built a lot of really crappy things, and it takes lots and lots of those bad projects that don't go as well as you'd hope to finally get to one every so often that you're proud of. And so, like Paul said, don't put a lot of pressure on yourself this week. This is your first foray into all this documentation and vector stuff, and you're going to learn so much by doing it one time. And then we're going to come back together for show and tell, and you'll see 12 ideas of stuff you want to try. And so, hopefully, you're excited. Hopefully, you can get yourself started really, really well. And if you need any support, we will be around, able to help. You can send a message through Slack. And I did say that there would be a do right now thing, and that would be to fill out there's a form that I'm going to send in a message before you leave, just for the sake that we get it done. One of the interesting things is that many of you are brand new members. And so we want to know, like, how'd you hear about this? Where did it come from? We've got some questions like that we're interested in knowing to better understand what's going on. We have and if you're in here looking at the webpage and you go to introductory survey on the Foundation's website, it is this survey right here where you can put in some information about just your experience and what it is, and you can fill this in to tell us a little bit more about your intro to the course. So that's our right now.
Corey, it says I need permission when I go there.
Oh, that is terrible. That happened to you too? All right. All right, I'm going to find this and send it to you when we get that all worked out. Yep. Sorry. Yep. Saved by a glitch. Oh yeah. Yep. No.
We have the computers over here.
Oh, that's true. We do have 4 computers over here in the space if you're interested, although that doesn't solve us with the permission glitch. I'll have to figure out how to make that. I will send you a direct link in the Foundation's chat, so you don't have to search for it. Right. And that, I think, is I didn't write this, so I need to get to the owner of this document. Google Drive is quirky. And this is for if you have a .makehaven or makehaven.org user account, which none of you do, then you can get to it. I have one, but if I can recreate this error, but that's not the point of us all sitting here looking at a screen. It totally is. It's not worth it for us to all sit here and wait for me to do that. So with that, lovely to meet all of you. I'm going to stop the recording, say thank you for showing up. If you want to chat, I'm not going anywhere right away. And we can check out anything that you want to chat about. So for those of you who are playing along at home, thanks for joining us. Have a great evening, and we'll be in contact through Slack, and then we'll see you this time next week. See ya. All right. And
Bye.
Bye. Let's see.